First story, A Cop's Cosmic Nightmare. England, 1980. It was just another night shift in Todmorden, or so I thought. November 28th, 1980. A date that's forever etched into my memory. I was on patrol, driving through the quiet streets of our little town in West Yorkshire. The clock on my dashboard read 5 a.m., and the world around me was shrouded in that peculiar pre-dawn darkness. As a police constable, I'd seen my fair share of strange occurrences, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter. The streets were deserted, and an eerie stillness hung in the air. It was the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I remember thinking to myself how odd it was, how even the usual night sounds seemed muffled. No distant barking dogs, no rumble of early morning traffic, just an unsettling silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me after hours of monotonous driving. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was as if the very air around me had changed, becoming charged, with an energy I couldn't explain. Little did I know my entire world was about to be turned upside down in a way that would haunt me for the rest of my life. As I turned onto Burnley Road, my headlights swept across something that made my blood run cold. There, hovering silently, about 5 feet above the rain-soaked asphalt, was an object unlike anything I'd ever seen before. At first, my mind scrambled to make sense of it, trying to fit it into some familiar category, a bus perhaps, or some kind of experimental aircraft. But as I slowed my patrol car to a crawl, the reality of what I was seeing hit me like a punch to the gut. This was no terrestrial vehicle. The object was roughly diamond-shaped, about 20 feet wide and 14 feet high. It seemed to be made of some kind of metallic material, but it wasn't reflective like polished metal. Instead, it had a dull, almost organic sheen to it, like the carapace of some enormous insect. The bottom half rotated slowly, defying every law of physics I knew. There were no visible means of propulsion, no sound of engines or rotors. It just hovered there, as if gravity was merely a suggestion it chose to ignore. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my palms sweating as they gripped the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to flee from this impossible thing. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the unearthly spectacle before me. I reached for my radio, desperate to call for backup, to have someone else witness this to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I keyed the mic, all I got was a burst of harsh static. The radio was dead, leaving me alone with this craft, being. I didn't even know what to call it. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my notebook and pen. If no one would believe me, I had to document this. I had to have some proof of what I was seeing. As I started to sketch, trying to capture every bizarre detail of the object, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The air around the craft seemed to shimmer and distort, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But it wasn't heat. It was something else, some kind of energy field that warped the very fabric of reality around it. And then, as if sensing my scrutiny, the object began to change. The rotation at its base sped up, becoming a blur of motion. Lights, if you could call them that, began to pulse along its surface. They weren't like any lights I'd seen before. They seemed to shift and flow, more like bioluminescence than anything electrical. Colors I couldn't even name rippled across the craft's surface. hues that shouldn't exist in nature. And all the while, that oppressive silence continued, as if the very sound waves themselves were being absorbed by this thing's presence. I felt a pressure building in my head, a sensation that went beyond mere physical discomfort. It was as if something was reaching into my mind, probing, searching. I tried to look away, to close my eyes, but I couldn't. My gaze was locked onto the craft, my body frozen in place. The last thing I remember before everything went black was a blinding flash of light, so intense it seemed to sear itself into my retinas. And then, nothing. A void where my memories should be, a gap in time that would haunt me for years to come. When I came to, I found myself still sitting in my patrol car, but something was terribly wrong. My head was pounding, and there was a metallic taste in my mouth that made me want to gag. I blinked hard, trying to clear the fog from my vision, and that's when I realized I wasn't where I should have been. The car was now parked about a mile down Burnley Road, facing the opposite direction. My watch showed that nearly an hour had passed, but I had no recollection of how I'd gotten there or what had transpired during that lost time. Panic began to set in as I frantically searched my surroundings for any sign of the craft, but the road was empty, the sky clear. It was as if nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. The evidence was there in my trembling hands, in the sweat soaking through my uniform, and in the notebook lying open on the passenger seat. I picked it up, my heart racing as I flipped through the pages. What I saw made my blood run cold. The sketches I'd started were there, but they weren't alone. Page after page was filled with bizarre symbols and diagrams I didn't remember drawing. Some looked like complex mathematical equations, others like anatomical drawings of creatures that couldn't possibly exist on Earth. And interspersed throughout were words in a language I didn't recognize, written in my own handwriting. I slammed the notebook shut, unable to process what I was seeing. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of the inexplicable gap in my memory and the evidence before me that something profound had occurred. As the days passed, the incident on Burnley Road consumed my every waking moment. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of something, glimpses of experiences my conscious mind couldn't or wouldn't fully recall. Fragments of memories that felt alien and terrifying. I saw myself floating, suspended in a space that defied description. I felt phantom sensations of cold metal against my skin, of hands, if you could call them that, prodding and examining me. But worst of all were the eyes. Large, dark, and utterly inhuman, they stared at me from the depths of my subconscious, filled with an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly alien. I knew I needed help, needed answers, but who could I turn to? My fellow officers already looked at me with suspicion and barely concealed ridicule. The official report I'd filed had been met with skepticism at best, outright disbelief at worst. Even my wife could see that something had changed in me, though I couldn't bring myself to burden her with the full weight of what I'd experienced. It was eating me up inside, this secret, this knowledge that the universe was far stranger and more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. I started to withdraw from friends and family, spending hours poring over my notebook, trying to decipher the mysterious symbols and equations. I became obsessed with UFO literature, devouring every book, an article I could find on the subject. But nothing I read came close to explaining what had happened to me that night. It was during this dark period that I made the decision to undergo hypnotic regression. I was desperate for answers, willing to try anything to fill in the blanks of that missing hour. The session was arranged in secret, away from the prying eyes of my colleagues and the media that had started to hound me. As I lay back in the chair, listening to the hypnotist's soothing voice, I felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. What if I discovered something I wasn't prepared to face? What if the truth was more terrifying than the uncertainty? But I needed to know. As I slipped into a trance state, the floodgates of my subconscious mind began to open. At first, it was just fleeting images, disconnected and chaotic. But then, with shocking clarity, the memories began to surface. I saw myself being lifted from my patrol car by a beam of light, my body limp and unresisting. I was drawn upward into an opening in the underside of the craft. The interior was unlike anything I could have imagined. It wasn't the sterile, metallic environment I'd seen in sci-fi movies. Instead, it was organic, almost alive. The walls pulsed with an inner light, and surfaces shifted and reformed as if responding to unseen commands. And then I saw them, the beings. They were humanoid in basic shape, but that's where any resemblance to humans ended. They stood about 4 feet tall, with large, bulbous heads and eyes that seemed to swallow all light. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, with a network of fine, glowing veins visible beneath the surface. They moved with an eerie grace, their limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. As they approached me, I felt no fear. Instead, there was a sense of calm, of understanding. One of them reached out and touched my forehead, and in that instant, I felt a rush of information flooding into my mind. It was too much to process, too vast to comprehend. But I knew that in that moment, I was being given knowledge beyond anything humanity had yet discovered. The hypnosis session continued, revealing more details that shook me to my core. I recalled being laid out on some kind of examination table, but it wasn't cold or hard like you'd expect. It felt alive somehow, adjusting to the contours of my body. The beings surrounded me, their movements precise and purposeful. They didn't speak, at least not in any way I could hear with my ears. Instead, their communication seemed to bypass my senses entirely, flowing directly into my mind in a stream of concepts and emotions too complex for words. I felt them probing my thoughts, sifting through my memories like they were flipping through the pages of a book. It wasn't painful, but it was deeply unsettling, like having the most private corners of your mind laid bare. At one point, one of the beings produced an instrument. I hesitate to call it a tool, because it seemed to be an extension of their own body. They used it to examine my eyes, my mouth, my ears. I remember a sensation of tingling energy coursing through my body as if every cell was being scanned and analyzed. Throughout the examination, I was aware of a larger presence in the room, a consciousness that seemed to oversee the entire process. I never saw it directly, but I felt its attention on me, vast and ancient and utterly alien. It was this presence that seemed to be directing the flow of information into my mind, imparting knowledge that I couldn't fully grasp, but that I knew was changing me on a fundamental level. As the hypnosis session progressed, I began to recall the most disturbing part of my experience. The being started to show me images, projecting them directly into my mind. I saw visions of Earth's past, present, and possible futures. I witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations long lost to history. Technological marvels beyond our current understanding, and catastrophic events that made my blood run cold. But it wasn't just Earth they showed me. I saw other worlds, other dimensions, realities so far removed from our own that my mind struggled to comprehend them. The sheer scale of the universes they revealed to me was overwhelming. I felt like an ant suddenly given a glimpse of the entire cosmos. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. But amidst all this cosmic knowledge, there was something else, something darker. I sensed that these beings, as advanced as they were not all powerful. They seemed to be searching for something, perhaps even running from something. There was an urgency to their actions, a sense that time was running out, not just for them, but for all of us. They imparted to me a warning, though the specifics were clouded and confusing. Something about a coming change, a shift in reality itself that would affect every living thing in the universe. I got the impression that humanity was somehow important. In this cosmic drama, though, I couldn't understand why or how. The weight of this knowledge, even filtered through the fog of partial understanding, was almost too much to bear. The hypnosis session ended with my return to the patrol car. I remembered the beings guiding me back, their touch surprisingly gentle. There was a sense of, not quite sadness, but something akin to it, as if they regretted the burden of knowledge they'd placed upon me. As they laid me back in the driver's seat, one of them placed its hand on my forehead one last time. In that moment, I felt a surge of energy, and with it came a final message. It wasn't in words, but I understood it clearly. Remember when the time comes. And then, in a flash of light, they were gone. As I came out of the hypnotic state, I found myself drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The hypnotist looked at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "In all my years," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I've never experienced anything like that." He played back the recording of our session, and as I listened to my own voice describing these incredible events, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was one thing to have fragmented memories and strange feelings. It was another entirely to hear myself recounting in vivid detail an encounter that defied all rational explanation. I left the hypnotist's office that day with more questions than answers, but also with a certainty that what had happened to me was real. The world suddenly seemed both bigger and smaller. Bigger because I now knew the vastness of what lay beyond our planet, and smaller because I realized how insignificant our daily concerns were in the grand scheme of things. In the weeks and months that followed, I struggled to come to terms with my experience. The knowledge imparted to me by the beings was like a puzzle with missing pieces. I had glimpses of incredible truths, but I couldn't quite fit them together into a coherent whole. It was maddening. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my mind racing with fragments of information that seemed vitally important, only to have them slip away as I tried to grasp them. My work suffered. I found it hard to focus on mundane police duties when I knew there were forces at work in the universe beyond our wildest imaginings. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Some were concerned, others skeptical. I overheard whispers, jokes about Spaceman Godfrey when they thought I wasn't listening. It hurt, but I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. I tried to keep quiet about what I'd experienced, but word got out. Reporters started calling. UFO enthusiasts sought me out. Some were genuinely interested, others just looking for a sensational story. I felt torn between wanting to share what I knew and feeling like I had a responsibility to keep it secret. After all, the beings had chosen to interact with me. Did that mean I had some kind of duty to protect their privacy, their existence? And what about the warning they'd given me? The sense of an impending change, a shift in reality. Was I supposed to prepare people for that? But how could I, when I didn't even fully understand it myself? As time passed, the intensity of my memories began to fade, but the impact of the experience never diminished. I found myself looking at the world differently, seeing patterns and connections I'd never noticed before. The equations and symbols in my notebook, while still largely incomprehensible, seemed to resonate with certain scientific discoveries I'd read about. Quantum entanglement, parallel universes, dark matter, concepts that had once seemed like science fiction now felt tantalizingly close to the truths I'd glimpsed aboard that craft. I started reaching out to scientists, trying to share what I knew without revealing its source. Most dismissed me, of course, but a few listened, intrigued by the ideas I presented. One physicist in particular, after a long conversation about theoretical physics that left me mentally exhausted, looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Where did you say you learned all this?" he asked. I just smiled and changed the subject. How could I explain that my knowledge came from beings from another world, perhaps even another dimension? Still, these interactions gave me hope. Maybe, in some small way, I could help advance human understanding without fully revealing what had happened to me. But always, in the back of my mind, was the nagging sense that I was missing something crucial. The beings had told me to remember that there would come a time when this knowledge would be important. But when? And for what purpose? 1 year after my encounter, I decided to revisit the site on Burnley Road where it all began. It was a cold, clear night, much like the one when I first saw the craft. As I stood there, the memories came flooding back with an intensity that took my breath away. I could almost see the diamond-shaped object hovering above the road, feel the strange energy that had permeated the air that night. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that they might return, that I might get some answers to the questions that had been tormenting me. But the night remained quiet and still. As I turned to leave, feeling a mixture of disappointment and relief, something caught my eye. There, in the grass by the side of the road, was a small metallic object. My heart raced as I bent to pick it up. It was unlike any material I'd ever seen, lightweight yet incredibly strong, with a surface that seemed to shift and change color as I turned it in my hand. Was this a piece of their technology? Had they left it for me to find? Or was it just a coincidence? A bit of ordinary trash that my desperate mind was imbuing with significance? I stood there for a long time, the strange object clutched in my hand, torn between excitement and fear. Part of me wanted to take it to a lab, have it analyzed, prove to the world that what I'd experienced was real. But another part, the part that remembered the being's gentle touch and their warning of things to come, told me to keep it secret. In the end, I slipped the object into my pocket and drove home, my mind whirling with new questions and possibilities. The discovery of the metallic object reignited my obsession with understanding what had happened to me. I spent countless hours examining it, trying to decipher its purpose or origin. Under normal light, it appeared unremarkable, just a small, smooth piece of metal. But when I viewed it under different conditions, it revealed hidden complexities. Under ultraviolet light, Intricate patterns emerged on its surface, swirling, designs that seemed to shift and change the longer I looked at them. When I held it near electronic devices, they would malfunction in strange ways. Clocks would run backward, radios would pick up impossible frequencies filled with alien sounds. Once, in a moment of frustration, I tried to scratch its surface with a diamond-tipped tool. The tool shattered, leaving the object unmarked. Its properties defied everything I knew about materials science, and I knew I was holding something that was truly not of this world. But more than its physical strangeness, the object seemed to have an effect on me. When I held it, especially late at night when the world was quiet, I would experience flashes of something. Not quite memories, not quite visions, but glimpses of places and things beyond my comprehension. Vast cityscapes that seemed to defy physics, stretching in impossible directions. Beings of pure energy, communicating in ways that made telepathy seem primitive by comparison. And always, underlying these fleeting images, was a sense of urgency, of a cosmic countdown ticking away towards some unknown event. As the months wore on, I found myself withdrawing further from my old life. My work suffered. How could I focus on local crime reports when I held in my hand proof of intelligences beyond our wildest dreams? My marriage began to strain under the weight of my secrets and obsessions. I could see the concern in my wife's eyes, could feel her pulling away as I spent more and more time locked in my study, poring over my notes and the strange object. I wanted to confide in her, to share the burden of what I knew, but how could I expect her to understand when I barely understood it myself? And always there was the fear that I was losing my grip on reality, that perhaps the stress of that night had caused me to suffer some kind of mental break. But then I would look at the object, would feel its impossible weight in my hand, and I would know that it was all real, too real. I began to have dreams, vivid, terrifying dreams that felt more like memories or premonitions. I saw Earth changed, transformed by forces beyond our control or comprehension. I saw humanity evolving, merging with technology in ways that blurred the line between flesh and machine. And always, in the background of these visions, I sensed the presence of the beings who had taken me that night. They were watching, waiting, guiding us towards some cosmic destiny that I couldn't quite grasp. It was on the second anniversary of my encounter that everything changed again. I had taken to spending the night of November 28th at the site on Burnley Road, hoping against hope for some sign, some message. This time, as I stood in the cold night air, the strange object clutched in my hand, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed to thicken, to vibrate with an energy I recognized from that fateful night. My heart began to race, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. Was this it? Were they returning? The object in my hand grew warm, then hot, pulsing with a light that seemed to come from within. Symbols began to appear on its surface, similar to the ones I had drawn in my notebook 2 years ago. And then, suddenly, I understood. The information that had been locked in my subconscious, the knowledge the beings had imparted to me, it all came flooding back in a rush of clarity. I saw the patterns, the connections, the vast tapestry of space and time that linked all things. I understood the warning they had given me, the reason for their visit. Our world was approaching a crossroads, a moment of cosmic significance that would determine the fate not just of humanity, but of countless civilizations across the universe. The beings hadn't just been observing us or studying us. They had been preparing us, and I somehow had been chosen as a conduit for this preparation. As this realization washed over me, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, half expecting to see the craft to be taken again. But there was nothing there, at least nothing visible to the naked eye. Yet I could feel them, could sense their consciousness touching mine. In that moment, I received one final message, clearer than any before. "The time is approaching," they said, not in words but in pure thought and emotion. "You must be ready. They will come to you seeking answers. Guide them, prepare them. The future of all depends on the choices that will be made." And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation faded. The object in my hand cooled, its light dimming until it was once again just a strange piece of metal. But I was changed. The confusion and fear that had plagued me for 2 years were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and understanding. I knew what I had to do, even if the path forward was still unclear. As I drove home that night, my mind was calmer than it had been since that first encounter. I knew that my life would never be the same, that I could never go back to being the person I was before. But I also knew that I was part of something greater, something that stretched beyond our world and our understanding. The beings had chosen me for a reason, had entrusted me with knowledge that could shape the future of humanity. It was a terrifying responsibility, but also an incredible gift. As I pulled into my driveway, I made a decision. It was time to stop hiding, time to start preparing. Whatever was coming, whatever cosmic shift awaited us, I would face it head-on, and I would do everything in my power to help others understand and prepare for the incredible journey that lay ahead. The truth was out there, and I had been given the task of helping humanity find it. Second story, The Secret of Flying Saucer Hill, South Africa, 1956. It was just another ordinary day on my family's farm in the Natal Midlands of South Africa. The year was 1956, and I was going about my usual routine, tending to the animals and checking on the crops. Little did I know that this day would change my life forever. As I walked through the fields, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was like a tingling in the air, something electric and otherworldly. I looked up at the sky, shielding my eyes from the bright African sun, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a heat mirage shimmering in the distance. But as I focused my gaze, I realized I was looking at something that defied explanation. A metallic object, unlike anything I'd ever seen before, was hovering silently above the farm. Its surface gleamed with an unearthly sheen, reflecting the sunlight in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The object was disc-shaped, with no visible means of propulsion. It just hung there in the air, as if gravity had no hold on it. As I watched, transfixed, the disc began to descend slowly towards the ground. I knew I should run, should call for help, but something held me in place. It was as if an invisible force was compelling me to stay, to witness whatever was about to unfold. As the craft touched down on the grassy field, I noticed there were no scorch marks or disturbance to the vegetation beneath it. It was as if it had simply materialized out of thin air. A hatch opened on the side of the craft, and that's when I saw him for the first time. He emerged from the ship with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. His movements were fluid, otherworldly, and yet there was something undeniably familiar about him. He was tall, with features that were both alien and beautiful. His skin had a pale, luminescent quality to it, and his eyes... oh, his eyes were like nothing I'd ever seen before. They were large, almond-shaped, and seemed to hold the wisdom of the universe within them. As he approached me, I felt no fear. Instead, I was filled with a sense of calm, of recognition. It was as if I had known him my entire life, even though we had never met before. He spoke, and his voice resonated within my mind rather than through the air. "Elizabeth," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver down my spine. "I am Akon. I have come for you." In that moment, I knew that everything I had ever known, everything I had ever believed about the world, and my place in it, was about to change forever. Without hesitation, I took Akon's outstretched hand. His touch was warm, comforting, and sent a jolt of energy through my body. As he led me towards the craft, I felt as if I was in a dream. The rational part of my mind was screaming at me to run, to hide, to call for help. But a deeper part of me, a part I hadn't even known existed until that moment, knew that this was right. This was meant to be. As we approached the ship, I marveled at its construction. The material it was made of seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, sometimes appearing metallic, sometimes almost translucent. There were no seams, no rivets, no signs of human manufacturing. It was a perfect, seamless creation that defied earthly engineering. Akon guided me inside, and I gasped as I entered. The interior was vastly larger than the exterior suggested, a physical impossibility that my mind struggled to comprehend. The walls pulsed with a soft, organic light, and I could feel a gentle vibration beneath my feet, as if the ship itself was alive. There were no buttons, no levers, no visible controls of any kind. Instead, I watched in awe as Akon simply placed his hands on a shimmering panel, and the ship came to life around us. The hatch closed silently behind us, and I felt a momentary pang of fear. What was I doing? I had just willingly entered an alien spacecraft with a being I had only just met. But as I looked into Akon's eyes, I felt that fear melt away. There was kindness there and something else. A connection that transcended species, that reached across the vastness of space and time. As the ship lifted off, I felt no sensation of movement. The farm, my home, the only world I had ever known, simply faded away beneath us. In its place, I saw the curvature of the earth, a blue and green jewel set against the velvet blackness of space. The sight took my breath away. I pressed my hands against the transparent walls of the ship, drinking in the view of my planet from a perspective I had never imagined possible. Akon stood beside me, his presence a comforting warmth in the face of the vast, cold emptiness of space. "This is how we see your world," he said, his thoughts flowing into my mind. Beautiful, fragile, and so full of potential. I turned to him, my mind buzzing with questions. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why had he chosen me? As if sensing my thoughts, Akon began to explain. He was from a planet called Meton, orbiting a star in the Alpha Centauri system. His people had been observing Earth for millennia, watching our progression and development. "We've been waiting," he said, "for the right time, the right person to make contact." The implications of his words were staggering. I was that person. Out of all the billions of people on Earth, Akon and his people had chosen me. Our journey through space was unlike anything I could have imagined. Stars streaked past us in rivers of light, and I saw celestial phenomena that defied description. Nebulae of impossible colors, binary stars locked in an eternal dance, and planets of every conceivable type. Throughout it all, Akon was my guide, explaining concepts that were far beyond my earthly education. He spoke of interstellar travel, of the manipulation of space-time itself, of energy sources so powerful they could fuel a civilization for millennia. But it wasn't just the marvels of the cosmos that captivated me. It was Akon himself. The more time I spent with him, the more I felt drawn to him. There was a gentleness to him, a wisdom that seemed to radiate from his very being. He spoke of his world, Meton, with such love and reverence that I found myself longing to see it. And then, as if granting my unspoken wish, Akon announced that we were approaching his home. As we neared Meton, I was struck by its beauty. It was a world of crystal cities and lush, unspoiled wilderness. The planet seemed to glow with an inner light, and I could sense even from orbit the harmony and peace that permeated every aspect of their society. Our descent to Meton was as smooth and effortless as our departure from Earth had been. As we touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering, iridescent structures, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was truly an alien world, and I was about to become the first human to set foot on it. Akon sensed my nervousness and took my hand, sending waves of reassurance through our touch. "You are welcome here, Elizabeth," he said. "My people have long awaited this moment." As the hatch opened, I was enveloped by the atmosphere of Meton. The air was sweet and clean, filled with scents I couldn't identify but found instantly soothing. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth's, and I felt almost buoyant as I took my first steps. The ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse with life, and I could hear a faint, melodious hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Akon explained that this was the sound of their world's energy grid, a harmonious network that powered their entire civilization without harming the environment. As we walked towards the nearest structure, I saw other Metonites for the first time. They were similar to Akon in appearance, tall and graceful, with the same luminescent skin and deep, knowing eyes. They regarded me with open curiosity, but I sensed no fear or hostility from them. Instead, I felt welcomed, accepted. It was as if I had finally found a place where I truly belonged. The days that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and wonder. Akon took me on a tour of his world, showing me marvels that I could scarcely comprehend. The Metonites had mastered technologies that seemed like magic to my earthbound mind. They had eliminated disease, hunger, and conflict. Their society was based on cooperation and mutual understanding, with each individual working for the betterment of all. I saw great halls of learning where knowledge was shared freely, vast gardens that produced abundant food without the need for harmful chemicals, and transportation systems that moved people effortlessly without pollution. But what struck me most was the deep connection the Metonites had with their planet and with each other. They communicated not just through words, but through a form of telepathy that allowed for a level of empathy and understanding I had never experienced before. As Akon taught me to open my mind to this form of communication, I felt as if veils were being lifted from my consciousness. Colors became more vivid, sounds more rich and complex. I began to sense the underlying rhythms of life itself, the cosmic dance that connected all living things. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself falling deeply in love with Akon. It wasn't just his physical beauty or his vast intelligence that drew me to him. It was the depth of his compassion, the way he saw the universe as a grand, interconnected whole. Our relationship deepened, transcending the boundaries of our different species. We shared thoughts, memories, and emotions in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying in its intimacy. One night, as we stood on a balcony overlooking a valley filled with bioluminescent plants that pulsed with otherworldly light, Akon took my hands in his. "Elizabeth," he said, his mental voice filled with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "I want to show you something." He led me to a room I hadn't seen before, deep within the crystal spires of the city. As we entered, I gasped. The walls seemed to fall away, and we were surrounded by stars. It was as if we were floating in the void of space itself. "This is the Akashic Record," Akon explained. "It contains the collective knowledge and experiences of not just our people, but of all sentient beings in the universe." As I stood there, overwhelmed by the vastness of it all, information began to flow into my mind. I saw the birth of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations on countless worlds, the intricate web of life that connected all things. And then, to my shock, I saw myself. I saw my past lives, my future potential, my place in the grand cosmic drama. The experience of the Akashic Record left me profoundly changed. I began to see my life on Earth, my entire species, from a new perspective. We were so young, so full of potential, but also so fragile. The conflicts that had seemed so important before now felt petty and insignificant in the face of the vast, cosmic tapestry I had glimpsed. I shared these thoughts with Akon, and he listened with the patience and understanding that I had come to cherish. "This is why we chose you, Elizabeth," he said. "You have the capacity to bridge our worlds, to help humanity take its next steps towards cosmic citizenship." As he spoke, I felt a surge of purpose and determination. I knew then that my life would never be the same, that I had a mission that transcended my own individual existence. But with this realization came a bittersweet understanding. I couldn't stay on Meaton forever. As much as I had come to love this world and its people, as deeply as I had fallen in love with Akon, I knew that my place was back on Earth. I had to return, to share what I had learned, to help prepare humanity for the wonders and challenges that awaited us among the stars. The thought of leaving filled me with an almost physical pain, but I knew it was necessary. As if sensing my thoughts, Akon pulled me close. "Our separation is not forever," he assured me. "This is just the beginning." The night before my departure, Akon and I shared an intimacy that transcended physical boundaries. Our minds merged in a way that was both spiritual and profoundly physical. I felt as if every cell in my body was alive with cosmic energy, resonating in harmony with the universe itself. In that moment of union, something miraculous happened. I knew with a certainty that defied explanation that I was carrying Akon's child, a hybrid, a bridge between our two species growing within me. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. How would this child develop? Would it be accepted on Earth? What kind of life could I provide for a being that was half human, half Meatonite? Akon sensed my turmoil and cradled me in his arms. "This child is a gift," he whispered in my mind. "A symbol of hope for both our worlds. You will not be alone in this, Elizabeth. We will always be connected." As dawn broke on my last day on Meaton, I felt a profound sense of loss and anticipation. I was leaving behind a world of wonder, a love deeper than anything I had ever known. But I was also carrying a part of that world with me. Akon and a group of Metonite elders escorted me to the ship that would take me back to Earth. As I prepared to board, Akon pressed a small crystal into my hand. "This will help you remember," he said, "and it will allow us to communicate, even across the vast distances that will separate us." The journey back to Earth was a blur of emotions and sensations. As the blue-green orb of my home planet grew larger in the viewport, I felt a mix of longing for what I was leaving behind and anxiety about what lay ahead. How would I explain my absence? Would anyone believe my story? And how would I protect the precious life growing inside me? As the ship touched down in the same field where my adventure had begun, I realized that no time had passed on Earth. It was as if I had never left. The sun was in the same position. The animals were exactly where they had been when I departed. Akon explained that the Metonites had the ability to manipulate time and space, ensuring that my absence wouldn't be noticed. As I prepared to disembark, Akon pulled me close one last time. "Remember, Elizabeth," he said, his mental voice filled with love and reassurance. "You are never truly alone. Our connection transcends space and time. Our child is a living testament to that connection." With a final lingering look, I stepped out of the ship and back onto the soil of my home world. As the craft rose silently into the sky, I clutched the crystal Akon had given me, feeling its warmth pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I watched until the ship disappeared from view, knowing that my life would never be the same. The days and weeks that followed my return were a strange mix of the mundane and the extraordinary. On the surface, everything was as it had always been. I went about my daily routines on the farm, interacted with neighbors and family, and to all outward appearances nothing had changed. But inside, I was transformed. Every night I would hold the crystal Akon had given me, using it to communicate with him across the vast gulfs of space. He guided me through my pregnancy, helping me understand the unique needs of our hybrid child. As my body changed, I lived in constant fear of discovery. How would I explain a pregnancy that seemed to progress at an accelerated rate? What would happen if a doctor examined me and found something inexplicable? I began to withdraw from society, using the excuse of ill health to avoid too much interaction. My family was concerned, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? As the months passed, I felt increasingly isolated. The only comfort I had was my nightly communications with Akon and the constant reminder of his presence in the form of our growing child. I could feel the baby's consciousness developing, alien and familiar all at once. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of Meton in my dreams, vivid flashes of crystal spires and shimmering energy fields. Were these memories, or was our child somehow bridging the gap between worlds? The birth of our son was a moment of both terror and transcendent joy. I had retreated to a remote cabin in the mountains, far from prying eyes as the time drew near. Akon had prepared me as best he could through our psychic link, but nothing could have truly readied me for the experience. The labor was intense, unlike anything I had ever endured, but mercifully short. As I held our child for the first time, I was struck by his otherworldly beauty. His skin had a faint, pearlescent sheen, and his eyes were like miniature galaxies, deep and filled with an awareness that no newborn should possess. I named him Aiden, a name that felt right, as if it had been whispered to me from across the stars. In those first few days with Aiden, I experienced a love so profound it threatened to overwhelm me. He was perfect, a flawless blend of human and metanite. But as the initial euphoria faded, reality began to set in. How could I protect him? How could I raise a child who was quite literally not of this world? The crystal Akon had given me pulsed, with increased frequency, and through it I felt his reassurance and love. He promised that we would find a way, that our son's existence was too important to be denied. As Aiden grew, it became clear that he was developing at an accelerated rate. By the time he was a few months old, he was already walking and attempting to communicate telepathically. I did my best to shield him from the outside world, but I knew we couldn't stay hidden forever. The crystal became our lifeline, with Akon providing guidance and support from across the vastness of space. He taught me how to help Aiden control his abilities, how to blend in with human children when necessary. But there were moments of pure magic too. Aiden could manipulate energy in ways I couldn't comprehend, creating beautiful light displays that danced across the walls of our cabin. His mind was a wonder, grasping complex concepts with ease. Through him, I gained an even deeper understanding of the universe and our place in it. Yet, for all his otherworldly abilities, Aiden was still my son. He laughed, he cried, he sought comfort in my arms. The bond between us was unbreakable, transcending the boundaries of species and planets. As the years passed, I lived in a state of constant vigilance, always aware of the need to protect our secret. But I also experienced joy beyond measure, watching my extraordinary child grow and learn. Akon's presence, though distant, was a constant comfort. Through the crystal, we shared in Aiden's milestones, united as a family despite the unfathomable distance between us. As Aiden approached his 5th birthday, I began to notice changes. His growth rate was slowing, aligning more with that of a human child. But his abilities were expanding in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. He could move objects with his mind, sense the emotions of others from a distance, and sometimes, when he was deep in concentration, I swore I could see faint outlines of Meaton's crystal cities shimmering around him. It was becoming increasingly difficult to keep him hidden from the world. I knew that sooner or later we would have to face the reality of his existence. One night, as I communicated with Akon through the crystal, he delivered news that sent shockwaves through my being. "It's time, Elizabeth," he said, his mental voice tinged with both sadness and resolve. "Aiden needs to return to Meaton. His hybrid nature requires training and understanding that only we can provide." The thought of being separated from my son was almost unbearable, yet deep down I had always known this day would come. Aiden was a child of two worlds, and he needed to understand both sides of his heritage. With a heavy heart, I agreed to Akon's plan. We would meet at the same spot where I had first encountered the Metanite ship all those years ago. As I prepared Aiden for the journey, explaining as best I could what was about to happen, I felt a mix of emotions so complex I could barely comprehend them. Joy at the thought of seeing Akon again, sorrow at the impending separation from my son, fear of what the future might hold. The night of Aiden's departure was clear and star-filled, as if the universe itself was welcoming him home. As we stood in the field, hand in hand, I saw the familiar shimmer of Akon's ship descending from the sky. Aiden's eyes widened with wonder, and I felt a surge of his excitement and apprehension through our telepathic bond. The ship touched down, and Akon emerged, looking exactly as he had the day we met. Our eyes locked, and in that moment, all the years of separation seemed to melt away. He approached us, kneeling down to Aiden's level. "Hello, my son," he said, both aloud and mentally. Aiden, usually so talkative, was speechless. He looked from Akon to me and back again, his young mind trying to process this moment he had been prepared for, but could never truly have been ready to face. As Akon explained the journey ahead, I felt my heart breaking. But I knew this was necessary, knew that Aiden needed to embrace both sides of his heritage to truly become who he was meant to be. With tears in my eyes, I hugged my son tightly, whispering words of love and encouragement. "This isn't goodbye," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's just the beginning of a new adventure." Akon placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt a flood of emotions: love, gratitude, sorrow, and hope. "We will return," he promised. "This is not the end of our story." As I watched the ship rise into the night sky, taking my son and the love of my life back to a world beyond the stars, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I knew that my life had been forever changed by this cosmic encounter, that I had been given a gift beyond measure. And as I clutched the crystal that had been my link to Akon all these years, I smiled through my tears, for I knew that someday, somehow, we would be reunited. And until then, I had a story to tell, a message to share with a world that desperately needed to look beyond its own boundaries and embrace the infinite possibilities that lay among the stars. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story: The Watchers in the Night, Florida, USA, 2000. It all started back in the early 2000s when I was living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Florida. At first I thought nothing of the strange occurrences in my house. You know how it is: you hear a creak in the night, see something move out of the corner of your eye, and you just brush it off. That's what I did for months. But looking back, I realize now that was when they first started watching me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, feeling like someone was in the room with me. But when I'd turn on the lights, there was never anything there. Just shadows playing tricks on my eyes, I told myself. But the feeling of being watched never went away. It was constant, this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like invisible eyes were always on me. I started having trouble sleeping, tossing and turning all night, plagued by vivid nightmares that I could never quite remember when I woke up. In the mornings I'd feel exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. My body ached, muscles sore as if I'd run a marathon in my sleep. I'd find bruises on my arms and legs that I couldn't explain. At the time, I chalked it up to stress, to working too hard and not taking care of myself. If only I'd known then what was really happening to me. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I remember because I had just gotten home from a late shift at work, bone-tired and ready to crash. I went through my usual routine: shower, quick bite to eat, then straight to bed. I fell asleep almost instantly, but it couldn't have been more than an hour later when I woke up. At first, I thought it was just another one of those nights where I'd jolt awake for no reason. But then I saw them. Standing at the foot of my bed were three small grey figures. They were maybe 4 feet tall, with large, bulbous heads and huge black eyes that seemed to bore right through me. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything, but I was paralyzed. It was like my brain was awake, but my body was still asleep. I could only lie there, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest, as these beings just stood there staring at me. And then, suddenly I felt myself being lifted off the bed. It was the strangest sensation, like gravity had just stopped working on me. I floated up towards the ceiling, still unable to move or speak. The last thing I remember seeing was my own body lying motionless on the bed below me before everything went black. When I came to, I was in a place that was definitely not my bedroom. It was cold, so cold that I could see my breath misting in front of me. The air felt thin and artificial, like being on an airplane, but worse. I was lying on some kind of metal table, and the surface was so cold it burned against my skin. The room, if you could call it that, was dimly lit with a bluish glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And then I saw them again, those grey figures moving around me with an eerie grace. There were more of them now, maybe 5 or 6. They didn't make a sound as they worked, their movements quick and precise. I tried to turn my head to get a better look, but I still couldn't move. I was completely at their mercy. One of them approached me holding something in its hand. It looked like a long, thin needle, but it glowed with the same bluish light as the room. I wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but no sound came out. I felt a sharp pain as the needle was inserted into my abdomen, and then another in my arm, and another at the base of my skull. The pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the terror I felt. What were they doing to me? Why me? These questions raced through my mind as I lay there, helpless and afraid. I don't know how long I was on that table. It could have been hours, or days, or even weeks. Time seemed to have no meaning in that place. The examinations, if that's what you can call them, were relentless. They prodded and poked every inch of my body, took samples of blood and tissue, and inserted various instruments into me that I couldn't even begin to describe. The worst part was the way they communicated with each other. It wasn't through speech, at least not in any way I could understand. It was more like a feeling in my head, a pressure that would build and then release, accompanied by images and sensations that weren't my own. Sometimes I'd get flashes of what they were thinking or planning, and it terrified me even more than the physical examinations. I saw visions of other humans on similar tables, of strange planets and technologies beyond my comprehension. And through it all, there was this overwhelming sense of purpose, of a grand plan that I was somehow a part of, whether I wanted to be or not. When I finally found myself back in my own bed, I was disoriented and confused. The sun was streaming through my windows, and my alarm clock was blaring. It was 7 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had. My body felt different, weaker somehow, and there were marks on my skin that hadn't been there before. Small circular bruises dotted my arms and legs, and there was a strange, perfectly straight scar on my abdomen that I knew hadn't been there the night before. I called in sick to work and spent the day in a daze trying to process what had happened to me. Was it real? Had I just had some kind of vivid, terrifying dream? But deep down, I knew the truth. The fear I felt was too real, the memories too vivid to be just a nightmare. That night I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my bed. I camped out on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every little sound. I was terrified they would come back for me. As the days passed, I tried to convince myself that it had been a one-time thing. Maybe they had gotten what they wanted from me and would leave me alone now. But I was wrong. So wrong. It happened again about a week later, and then again a few days after that. Each time was slightly different, but no less terrifying. Sometimes they would take me to that cold, metallic room. Other times, they would perform their examinations right there in my bedroom, somehow making the walls and ceiling disappear, replacing them with a vast, star-filled sky. I started to notice patterns, to anticipate when they might come. It was always at night, always when I was alone. I tried sleeping at friends' houses, staying up all night, even sleeping in my car. But somehow, they always found me. And each time, I would wake up feeling drained, with new marks on my body and fractured memories of the horrors I had endured. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced that every shadow held one of those gray figures. My work started to suffer, and my relationships began to fall apart. How could I explain to anyone what was happening to me? Who would believe me? Desperate for proof, I started setting up cameras all over my house. I bought the best equipment I could afford, night vision cameras, motion sensors, the works. I was determined to catch these beings on film, to prove to myself and to the world that I wasn't going crazy. At first, nothing happened. Night after night, I'd review hours of footage, only to see empty rooms and occasional shadows that could be explained away. But then, one night, I caught something. It was just a glimpse, a split second of footage, but it was there. A small, gray figure moving across my bedroom, its large black eyes reflecting the infrared light of the camera. My heart raced as I watched it, rewinding and replaying the clip over and over again. I had proof. Finally, I had proof. But my elation was short-lived. When I tried to show the footage to my family, to my friends, even to a local news station, they all dismissed it. They said it was too blurry, too dark, too easy to fake. Some even suggested that I had created it myself, that I was seeking attention or suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. Their disbelief was almost as painful as the abductions themselves. As time went on, the encounters became more frequent and more intense. It wasn't just physical examinations anymore. They started experimenting with my mind. I would find myself in strange, dream-like scenarios that felt completely real. One time, I was walking through a city I'd never seen before, surrounded by beings that looked almost human, but not quite. Another time, I was on what seemed to be another planet, with two suns in the sky and vegetation unlike anything on Earth. During these experiences, I could move and speak, unlike during the examinations, but I had no control over my actions. It was like I was a passenger in my own body, watching myself interact with these alien environments and beings. And always, there was that sense of an overarching purpose, a plan that I was a part of but couldn't understand. The worst part was coming back from these experiences. The transition was jarring, leaving me disoriented and questioning what was real and what wasn't. I'd find myself standing in my kitchen, not knowing how I got there or how long I'd been gone. Hours would pass in what felt like minutes, and sometimes days would go by in a blink. The toll on my mental and physical health was enormous. I lost weight rapidly, my skin took on a sickly pallor, and dark circles formed under my eyes from lack of sleep. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every unexpected noise or movement. My friends and family grew increasingly concerned, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. How could I explain that I was being abducted by aliens on a regular basis? That my body and mind were being used for some unknown extraterrestrial purpose? I knew how it would sound. So I withdrew, isolating myself more and more. I quit my job, unable to maintain a normal schedule with the constant interruptions of the abductions. I spent my days researching, trying to find others who had experienced similar things, looking for any information that might help me understand what was happening to me. I found online communities of people claiming to be abductees, but even among them, my experiences seemed extreme. Most talked about one-time encounters or occasional sightings. No one seemed to be going through the relentless, ongoing ordeal that I was enduring. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare that no one else could see or understand. As the months dragged on, I began to notice changes in myself that went beyond the physical and mental toll of the abductions. I started having flashes of knowledge about things I'd never studied. Complex mathematical equations would pop into my head, fully formed. I found myself sketching diagrams of advanced technology that I couldn't possibly understand. One day, I absent-mindedly solved a Rubik's Cube in seconds, something I'd never been able to do before. It was as if information was being downloaded into my brain during these encounters, but along with this new knowledge came a deep, unsettling feeling that I was being changed, altered on a fundamental level. I would catch glimpses of myself in mirrors and not recognize the person staring back at me. My eyes seemed different, somehow older, and filled with a knowledge that didn't belong to me. I started to wonder if I was even fully human anymore, or if I was slowly being turned into something else. The breaking point came on a night that I'll never forget. It started like many others, with that familiar sensation of being watched. But this time, when they came for me, something was different. There were more of them than usual, and they seemed agitated, their movements quicker and less precise. As they lifted me from my bed, I felt a surge of panic unlike anything I'd experienced before. Something was wrong. They took me to a place I'd never seen before. A vast chamber filled with what looked like thousands of containers, each one holding a human body suspended in some kind of liquid. With horror, I realized that I recognized some of the faces. People I'd seen on missing persons reports, faces from milk cartons and news stories. They were all here, preserved like specimens in a grotesque collection. And then I saw it, an empty container, seemingly waiting for me. In that moment I found a strength I didn't know I had. I fought back. I don't know how, but I managed to break free from their hold. I ran blindly through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. Alarms were blaring, lights flashing, and I could hear them pursuing me. I have no idea how I found my way out, but suddenly I was back in my bedroom, gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. After that night, everything changed. The abduction stopped, suddenly and completely. At first, I was relieved, thinking maybe my resistance had somehow put an end to it. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I found myself grappling with a new kind of terror. The silence, the absence of their presence was almost worse than the abductions themselves. I couldn't sleep, constantly expecting them to return. Every night, I'd lie awake, staring at my ceiling, waiting for that familiar sensation of being watched. But it never came. I started to question everything. Had it all been real? Or had I suffered some kind of mental breakdown? The marks on my body had faded. The strange knowledge in my head began to slip away, and I was left with nothing but fragmented memories and a deep, unshakable fear. I tried to go back to my normal life. But how could anything ever be normal again? I got a new job, moved to a new city, tried to start fresh. But the experience had changed me fundamentally. I couldn't relate to people the same way anymore. How could I engage in small talk, worry about mundane problems, when I had seen what I had seen? As time passed, I found myself caught between two conflicting desires. Part of me desperately wanted to forget everything that had happened, to convince myself it had all been a vivid hallucination brought on by stress or some undiagnosed mental illness, but another part of me couldn't let it go. I needed answers. I needed to know why they had chosen me, what they had done to me, and most importantly, why they had suddenly stopped. This need for answers led me down a rabbit hole of research. I spent countless hours poring over books about UFO sightings and alien abductions. I joined online forums and support groups for people who claimed to have had similar experiences. I even reached out to a few ufologists and researchers, though most of them dismissed my story as too far-fetched. But the more I searched, the more frustrated I became. None of the accounts I found quite matched my experience. Yes, there were similarities: the gray beings, the medical experiments, the lost time, but nothing that explained the intensity and frequency of my abductions or the sudden complete cessation. It was during this period of obsessive research that I started to notice strange things happening around me again. Not abductions, not yet, but little oddities that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Electronics would malfunction when I was near them. Streetlights would flicker and go out as I walked under them. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find all the clocks in my house stopped at the same time. Once, I could have sworn I saw one of those gray figures reflected in my television screen, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. These occurrences were subtle enough that I could almost convince myself I was imagining them, but frequent enough to keep me constantly on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, studying my reactions, perhaps preparing for something. The worst part was not knowing. Were they planning to take me again? Was this all building up to something bigger? Or was I simply losing my mind, seeing patterns and connections where there were none? About a year after the abductions had stopped, I had an experience that shook me to my core. I was driving home late one night, the road empty and dark. Suddenly my car's engine cut out. The headlights flickered and died, and I coasted to a stop on the side of the road. As I sat there trying to restart the car, I saw a bright light in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another car approaching, but the light grew larger and brighter until it filled the entire mirror. My heart began to race as I realized what was happening. I wanted to run, to get out of the car and flee, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, just like during the abductions. The light enveloped my car, and I felt that familiar sensation of weightlessness. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was about to happen. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished. I found myself still sitting in my car, the engine running as if nothing had happened. The entire incident had lasted maybe a minute, but it left me shaken to my core. They were back. Or maybe they had never really left. In the days and weeks following that incident on the road, I've been in a constant state of anticipation and dread. Every night, I go to bed wondering if this will be the night they come for me again. Every morning, I wake up surprised to find myself still in my own bed. The uncertainty is maddening. I've started to notice things, little details that I can't explain. Sometimes I'll find small objects in my house moved to places I know I didn't put them. Other times I'll discover strange marks on my body that fade within hours. Once, I woke up to find my shoes covered in a fine red dust that didn't match any soil in my area. These little anomalies keep me constantly on edge, never allowing me to fully relax or feel safe. I've considered seeking professional help, but what would I say? How could I explain any of this without sounding completely insane? And deep down, I'm afraid of what might happen if I do tell someone. Would they come for me again? Would they do something to silence me? The fear of the unknown is almost worse than the abductions themselves. I find myself caught in a limbo between two realities. In one, I'm a normal person trying to live a normal life, going to work, paying bills, interacting with friends and family. But in the other, I'm a victim of an ongoing extraterrestrial experiment, never knowing when or if they'll return to continue whatever it is they're doing to me. The strain of living this double life is taking its toll. I've become paranoid, constantly looking for signs or patterns that might give me some clue as to what's really going on. I've installed security cameras all over my house, but part of me knows that if they want to take me again, no amount of surveillance will stop them. I've even considered more extreme measures, going off the grid, living in some remote area where they might not be able to find me. But then I remember that night in my car, and I realize that nowhere is truly safe. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I find myself almost wishing they would come back. At least then I would know for sure that I'm not crazy, that all of this is real. The not knowing is the hardest part. Are they done with me? Was I just one experiment among many? Or am I still part of some larger plan that I can't even begin to comprehend? I don't have any answers, only questions that keep me up at night. All I know is that my life will never be the same. I can never unsee what I've seen, never unknow what I've experienced. I'm sharing my story here anonymously because I need someone, anyone, to know what happened to me. Maybe someone out there has gone through something similar. Maybe someone has answers. Or maybe, just maybe, by putting this out into the world, I can find some kind of closure. But deep down, I know the truth. This isn't over. Whether they come back tomorrow, next year, or never again, the impact of what they've done, to me, will last forever. I'm changed, irrevocably, and all I can do now is wait and wonder what comes next. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.